Well, good afternoon. I appreciate you joining us. I'm John Strickland. You can see my good friend Fernando Espana here. And we're talking about some work we've been doing about linking AWP with some lean thinking to drive some better outcomes. And we got a couple kind of exciting things we're going to go do. First off, while I'm talking, I've spent many years with CII and started CII events in the early 90s, and I've been on many research teams and have enjoyed that experience greatly. Many years in the EPC business, much of it with the CH2M Hill, Jacobs, and Burns & McDonnell organizations, and lately have formed Collaborative Flow here to kind of to specialize on these. And that's partly because I met up with my good friend Fernando Espana. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Fernando?
Yeah, thank you, John. Yes, John and I go way back, and we've been exploring these different, basically project delivery options for the past 20 plus years. And so my background is varied. I come out of the construction industry as a contractor, as an owner, developer, that kind of all those fields, and then got into actually lean construction, introduced to it in the late 90s, and also introduced to advanced technology in terms of 3D, and looked at production opportunities and production management opportunities using those 3D tools. Got involved with advanced work packaging. 2014 became president of ConstructX, and been heavily involved with CII, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But John and I are also leading up the joint working group for AWP plus Lean, is to look at how all this comes together. So today's webinar, which is called IWP Development and Release Planning, has quite a bit of topic to it. Let's put it that way. It's not going to be this is how you do it. It's going to be how should we be doing it? How should we be doing it right? Right. So we're gonna get into the facts of what it is, right? The basic facts, and we're going to look how do we accelerate, and we're also going to look at some of the values and opportunities that from lean thinking. So a little bit about the joint working group. We've probably heard about this. There's a lot of best practice out there, and we need to take advantage of it. We need to learn about it. And we've been looking at AWP, advanced work packaging. We've been looking at lean concepts, DFMA, design for manufacturing and assembly, operation science around flow control, and technologies that really help us scale our whole project delivery the opportunities in project delivery to really drive improvements. So that's what we've been terming next gen, and coming up with next generation solution sets. So if you want, John and I both are the co-chairs of this, and you can see we have a lot of members, and they come from a lot of different companies, and so a lot of active participation, which is fantastic. So as we explore this, so today is a little bit about IWP development and release planning, and think ahead of that, and then we'll also think in front of it. What are we really trying to accomplish? So John, why don't you go to the next slide? So I'm going to talk a little bit about IWP development and release planning on what it is and why we do it. So give a little bit of a little grounding for us all. So the ultimate goal, of course, is we want to produce installation work packages. For those of you in the AWP world would understand this. But what basically it's a set of instructions and processes and how a foreman would go do work, right, and execute that work, and the success criteria on the right. See, we want to execute that work. We want it to be constraint-free. He can start and end, and it's a very, very consumable scope of work. It's integrated across disciplines. It's the right size, usually around 1 to 2 weeks worth of work. That's what they can consume in their heads. It's done at the right time, not way too early, not way too late, at the right time. It's got the right amount of scope in it, the right conditions to execute it. All the field supervision are aligned, foremen are aligned, and IWP is released on time, not released too early, not released too late, right? We make a concerted effort to actually give it to the foreman when they need to go do and execute the work. So that's the ultimate goal. So if we look at, and you can go to the next slide, John, right. So basically, and those of you in advanced work packaging world knows that we are trying to break down the work, right? We go from this big picture site plan down to larger construction work areas, which are heavily multidiscipline, and then down to construction work packages, which are, break down an area by single disciplines. And then ultimately what I just talked about was giving a foreman an installation work package, which they can go execute, right, without having to start and stop, and they can do it seamlessly. So if you can click down one, key to that is information coming in, right? So a construction work package needs a lot of information from the supply chain, right? We talk about integrated material management, which is IMM, vendor work packages. How do they contribute to the betterment of developing and releasing those installation work packages? Go to the next, click the next one, right? And then ultimately, all those installation work packages that are being executed are going to contribute to some type of digital handover or commissioning and startup process that's going to be highly efficient. That's the other goal. Okay, so click the next one. And with all this, we need to know what's going on all the time, right? And we want to see this visually. If we have to look at tables and and spreadsheets to find our information, never happens. We're going to do what's easier on the mind. Just go start hammering nails, right? But what we want to do in reality is shield that installation work package from bad information coming from things that are upstream, right? So how do we design things? How do we organize? How do we release construction work packages? How do we get all the information, at the right timing? That will lend itself to developing those IWPs efficiently and effectively to hand down to the foreman. So that red line means really describes the concept of shielding the downstream work from bad work upstream. So if we look at it, from an installation, go ahead and click the next one. Yeah. So again, we need to shield at different places. So make sure that good vendor information is coming into the construction work packages, and then the final bit of shielding is done when we start handing over things at the commissioning and startup. How do we do the right installation work packages and the right combination of work to start a very efficient commissioning and startup program, and then eventually hand over a whole digital package to our customer? Now, what we describe on the left side of that first area, the path to CWP release, is how do we make sure that everything is in the right order, all the information that we need, all the materials, everything that is going to drive success of the installation work package, is done. So there's a path to that release, right? And that's when the CWP Readiness and Release Program is happening. And then on the right side is the path to IWP release. How do we develop those IWPs? When should we develop those IWPs, and when should we release them, and how should we release them, so we can have success when the foreman is building the work? Why don't you go ahead to the next slide?
Yeah, there you go.
So there's a lot of process, and for those of you that are in the installation, understand the AWP and the installation work process. On the upper right, IDP scoping, we start out, hey, we got to break down these bigger construction work packages into smaller and smaller chunks. So the idea that a foreman is going to go execute those. So how do we best scope and sequence? Then we go into planning, right, which is in the upper center there. The building and assembling these IWPs, reviewing them, making sure that they're fully integrated, resequence them as needed. So we're always revalidating. And then finally, when they're ready to go, we want to release them to the field for execution. Then they start dropping into the look-aheads. And of course, you can see in the very middle, we want to close them out efficiently, make sure they're done, and whatever's left, we can repackage them. And then we go through the whole commissioning and startup process, right? So all this ties together to really drive an efficiency, a machine-like condition where things just happen and work. So if you want to click the next slide. Or the next, yeah. So we have this area of IWP development. We have an area of IWP release, right? How do we do that? How do we best do that? And how do we get upstream efforts right to support it, right? And then finally at the bottom, which is really where the value is. Go ahead and click on the next one there, John. IWP to system completion, right? So as we do the work, develop it, release it, execute it, everybody knows what they're contributing to, which is the efficient startup of a facility. That's the ultimate goal here. So let's kind of look at what that means. So John is going to take us through some lean concepts, which we from the advanced work packaging, can start visualizing how we can apply these lean concepts to better our planning. And those of you in the lean world can start looking at, wow, this structured breakdown starts making a little sense, I can take it into the lean world. So John,
Yeah.
why don't you describe a little bit here?
Sure. The striking thing about this is, Fernando, we showed the slide of all the people who are working with, that nobody's arguing with us. As we're talking about linking lean and AWP, we're pulling these folks together. I've been surprised at how common the themes have been, and we've got the number of papers out there that we can probably reference after the webinar talk about that. But let's kind of talk about timing, because when I heard about construction work packages, that sound like a lot like a concept we use in some of the lean projects, scope blocks, and the IWPs sound a lot like what we do too. And that shielding diagram, the big red arrow line across there, was right out of the first last planner series of slides way back in the 90s. So we're talking about a lot of the same things, but we're going to talk a little bit about timing and when we think about it. So I want to talk about kind of why we do this. This is an all too common problem. And I'm going to describe how I think typical projects go. And so most projects, they start with an AE and CM. You do some kind of preliminary design. You do some kind of preliminary estimate. Say, hey, is that going to fit our budget? And if that's no, well, you might go back and change the parameters and go change that. But very often, you've got the design team mobilized. You're there. You've got people to keep busy. You go right on into detailed design and then eventually contractor bidding. And kind of the insidious thing is usually the people who prepared the preliminary design aren't directly involved with the estimate, and vice versa. And so after you have gone through and spent the entire design budget, or most of it, and after you've exercised the contractor, you find out, hey, is that going to fit our budget? And if that's yes, well, that's good. You have a semi-firm cost. And, I think all of us have been on projects where things changed, and that's really kind of where the change control process begins. But the problem is what happens if you get all the way through here. These designers are already supposed to be off on some other project. The contractors have already bid this once, and we can't get the project started. This is an extremely disruptive system. So when we talk about shielding, what we're going to do is I'd like to draw a line right here so that we're shielding the whole design effort using some of the same concepts that Fernando just shared about advanced work packaging. So that's the problem we see a lot. I present this slide probably hundreds of times, and usually when I ask, how often do you see this? The answer I get back is, yeah, most of the time. This is a very common problem. So, and then of course, we can't start construction because until we get this resolved, and so project after project kind of trips out of the gate because they can't get through this process. And so if you don't have this problem, that's great, but I think it's pretty common. So if you look here, this was Fernando's slide, all looks the same. But what I want to talk about though is this one line. This is construction work packages as area and single discipline, and it's just ironic that showed up exactly in the middle of the slide. That is the one thing that I was going to highlight. So if we're going to package for integration and flow, instead of packaging for how we're going to buy it, you can imagine that if each CWP enabled early cost validation so we could avoid or mitigate that all too common problem I talked about. And what about if they align the scope to the target value instead of a contract package? And so the owner would know what each of the things he values, why he's paying for those, what the things are. Or what if they integrated the trades and were precisely aligned with the commissioning packages? So your CWPs were exactly the same packages that you're going to use later on to work through your commissioning process. And of course, that help you for change control. So for me, CWPs look like fundamental scope blocks. And then we can also, this was about IWPs, but IWPs can have a great help for us also in aligning and eliminating jurisdictional misalignments and setting the project up for smooth flow. So if I go back and heard this, I would say, and what would be very different is we're doing this before detailed design starts. So we're just kind of moving the thinking a little sooner, which is a pretty common lean practice. And so what if we thought about construction work packages as fundamental scope blocks? And I'll kind of describe what they are. Fundamental scope blocks are the chunks of work or assemblies that add some specific capability. They're always nouns, and they're chunks that define how the job's going to be constructed and commissioned. So you have to understand that before you design it, if you want to build for design or design for construction. And they're the natural points of coordination. And they also create a nice historical bucket. And to get this across, let's kind of look at an example. And an air handling unit is one of my favorite examples, because almost every project, whether it's an industrial project, commercial project, whatever you want to talk about, will have an air handling unit. Someone's got to go buy that air handling unit. Someone's going to go place a housekeeping pad for it. Someone's going to go connect ductwork to it. Someone's going to hook up the power to it. Someone's going to go connect chilled water supply and return to it. And if we got chilled supply and water return, someone's going to have to go do condensate. Someone's going to go hook up the facility panel and the alarm panel. And so this would represent the fundamental scope block. And without all these things done and complete, no one can use the air handling unit. It doesn't do any good to have all but one of these things done. You can't start up the air handling unit. So this is about getting everyone to visualize it. These activities that connect it are called scope activities. So there will be a scope activity for the concrete contractor and the structural discipline to design the housekeeping pad. There'll be a scope activity for the mechanical contractor, whoever that would be, to connect the chilled water supply return to the header system. And that'll be designed by the mechanical engineer. But the chilled water supply return system is going to be there whether or not this air handling unit is. So this would be a separate fundamental scope block. And the electrical panel would be part of the electrical distribution fundamental scope block. It would be a separate FSB, but this scope activity connects them. So I'll talk a little bit more about scope activities. And so we talk about FSBs, but scope activities are actions. So whereas FSBs are nouns that describe the what, the scope activities describe the who and the how. And they're basically very, very closely aligned, about the same size chunks as installation work packages. And one of the really things we've discovered is maybe installation work packages should be defined by who they're going to hand off the work to and how it all connects together. So maybe the most important thing to talk about this in the time we have is that scope activities are kind of your advanced look of what you think a pole plan might be, and they have a single scope owner or contractor. They have a single system and a single design discipline, so they don't ever span that. If you break the job that way, you can visualize it easy. And then Fernando talked about the work breakdown structure. I'm talking about a work integration structure. I think there's another level of detail for people who get it. We won't get into that in here. We'll go through and see how this kind of looked. And this was something we developed when I was at Burns & McDonnell as a way to look at this. This was kind of a graphic that they had developed for the typical FEP process. FEP 1, 2, 3, you get bids, hire your contractors, and you do the validation and you start construction. Pretty straightforward. I think this is right out of CII. And basically, the CWP development starts happening here. The CWP and the IWP process happen later. If I want to contrast that a little bit with how I would look at that with fundamental scope blocks, is that we were using a collaborative design and scoping system there, where we would get things ready and we would do these early phases. And the big difference is we're identifying the CWP and identifying the IWP scope activities way early. We're not flushing them out. We're not finding all the constraints. We're not releasing the IWPs. We're just saying there's going to be an IWP eventually for a mechanical contractor to install the chilled water supply return piping. We don't go into we know who's going to go do it, and that's what we're going to design to. And then later on, we execute the IWP scope activity process. And I think this would be almost exactly borrowing out of what AWP is doing now, run through a production planning system. So the big change is we're moving things earlier. And some of you have noticed this whole contractor team selection. And what I say is this works. Well, this was developed as part of an integrated project delivery with pre-selected contractors. What we've discovered is very helpful, even if you're using very traditional contracting. And that's what we discovered. Here's an example we presented last year at the Lean Construction Institute conference. This was presented by Burns & McDonnell team with Lockheed Martin. They literally took my air handler sketch that I've used in all these presentations, and they went out and created a series of FSBs. Here's one for an air handler. And this was done before design ever started. It didn't take a whole long time, but they defined and graphically showed this. And this is kind of like a one-page summary of what this was, and our estimators can go estimate this. So this was very, very helpful for them. And I think this was done in Bluebeam. So that it doesn't have to be complicated. If you're going to scale this thing, we can show you how to go do this in a very sophisticated app, and this will pull together multi-billion-dollar projects that all can handle into fundamental scope blocks and scope activities. So it's very scalable. The whole idea is we're thinking about how we're going to go build it before we design it.
Yeah.
And building that constructability in. And just one little kind of point here, I mentioned that these IWP scope activities that we're thinking about very early are unique to a performer, design, discipline, and system. So if you do that, then you can take those and you can roll those up to be your basis of estimate. That's what we originally, 25 years ago, this was done. They also become your basis of design and map to your BIM attributes. And then they map to your construct, those same things can roll up to your contract scope packages, your scope control process. You've already got your schedule values done when you get pricing back on that. They can easily be rolled up into your master schedule, your equipment list, and the basis of your reporting. And the cool part of this is, this enables a multi-dimensional work break structure, or like I say now, a work integration structure. Because if we all have the same baseline, all these systems are tied to the exact same scope list. And if you want to go update this, you can update all these and you can have them intrinsically integrated. So I'd call it intrinsically integrated information. And that's a pretty powerful function of it that help a few of you catch some imagination and follow up with this on. So with that,
yeah. So let me.
Comments there?
Yeah, I was going to add. The fact is, when we think about IWP scoping activities that John's referring to, part of AWP best practice is looking ahead and putting virtual IWPs and scopes and sequences together. But what we need to realize that those are significantly valuable tools that if we take it from what is coming up, we talk about integrated project delivery, and there's a lot of activity that's going on around integrated industrial integrated project delivery, IIPD. And so when we look at these scope activities, as we break them down, now if we add a true layer of integration and concepts and how we actually design and estimate better, be more effective, what kind of attributes do we need to start building in, and what are those handoffs and trade-offs, and you'll see some of the values as we go through this as to why that's a huge opportunity for any industry to do. We can think through the actual execution.
A great example of this, we kind of discovered this by accident on our project, is we learned that our FSBs ended up being a great breakdown for our sharpen commissioning process. And that was very powerful because you don't have to go through that very awkward stage of managing by area and then starting up by system. You can actually, it naturally integrates that, and that awkward transition is largely mitigated. So that's a big benefit of thinking about that and breaking it up that way. So Fernando, I think you've got somewhere you can talk about here. Maybe Vishal, could you make Fernando the presenter?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So now let's take it all back. This is going to be about some of the value. So if we want to focus on the value, there's two key parts to that. It's collaboration and commitment, because what we're trying to drive is successful delivery of the CWPs, right? Releasing work that is ready to go do with a high probability of success. We want to develop those IWPs, obviously to integrate, and then release them when it's ready so the foreman can go do the work as we had all planned. So that commitment, what does that look like, right? It's dedicated and adequate resources delivering against those release plans, quality of information, really looking at performance expectations. And one of the key things is constraints. They're proactively identified and removed. The integration of things. So the collaboration is important here. Good dynamics across team members. We want to have consumable information. Execution decisions are made at the right level, which is key, right? So integrating and synchronizing across discipline, using visual tools, incentivizing to realize things, facilitating sound outcomes and safe outcomes. are key things that collaboration will help us drive. So we want to create those environments. The other part of this, of course, is driving effective process to achieve those better outcomes. And I know that many of you have seen this diagram that we've been showing for a while. Is the fact is that there are several layers to this. So if we're going to really do best, really have a successful IWP development and release program, right? The factors of people, process, the technology, and the culture to do all this needs to be in place, or at least be maturing to develop that in place. So again, the key underlying principles, we're trying to drive up reliability through people. We're trying to get repeatability in successful processes, right? Technology is scale because our projects are big, the data requirements are huge, and we need to be able to digest all that information, right? And the culture is, these are good ideas and we need to sustain these good practices with whether it's AWP plus Lean, and DFMA or other things, right? How do we sustain what's good for our project or our program? When we look at project and production management, and we look at the CWP and IWP development program, it really is here in the center, right? We talked about getting things ready, and that CWP release upstream has all the information that we need, right? Whether it's the material, the logistics delivery included, all the engineering information, the vendor information, understanding the permitting, anything that could possibly constrain the IWP work below, right, needs to be addressed, and we need a plan. So there's again a high probability of success. So at the right time, and we typically say, depending on the project, whether you release this 8 weeks ahead of when the work starts, 12 weeks ahead, or 16 weeks ahead, depending on the project type and the project complexity, right? It drops into this I want to call it a factory, where we take that, we start breaking it down. Here's the development side, right? We're trying to get to an IWP readiness condition where we can release it. So we want to look at constraints. We want to look at how, what goes into the development of those. Let's confirm what we virtually decided earlier. What are those true scopes? How are we really going to go build? And what's it going to take for my foreman to be successful? And we have all that and the integration of everything done. We can drop it into, we can release that to the foreman, general foreman, to go do their work, and then we can put it into a robust look ahead program that does that final field coordination, and then we can go and execute the work. So what we want to look at is, okay, yes, effective project management and control is absolutely something that has to be done. But with all this work and keeping production management in mind, right, what we do up here, and how early we do it and how we plan it will make for a much more effective process down here in this production, when we actually are designing what people are going to go do, at that very, very short range of production control. So this is going to be kind of key, and why we are talking about what we're talking about here. So the fact is, we need to look at this like a factory, right? Almost, but we also need to be able to people to visualize the immensity of the data exchanges, the work in the job, and we're talking about $1 billion program, all right, or hospital or whatever it is, right? Being able to see things always at the CWP readiness level, or the IWP level, right? That visual planning is going to be key to allowing people to absorb the data quickly and make better decisions, right, when they start developing that IWPs and look at those integration sequences, and then finally release something that they know there's a better chance of being executed. Are we going to be perfect? Absolutely not, right? So some of the other key factors that we want to talk about here, now that we've shown that slide, is that there's also a planning and process excellence that needs to happen. So if we put this in the back of our mind, and especially what John had just talked about, if we think about what we're really trying to accomplish during the IWP development and release packaging, we're looking at throughput. How does my IWP contribute to the increased throughput of the entire project, right? Do I understand the handoffs? is it a sound grouping of work where people can understand and actually execute, at the right time, at the right size? Is it safe? Is the sequence proper? Have I integrated the work? Can I learn from it? Right. So as we close out, we need to make sure that we are learning as we go, so we can apply it effectively, in real time. So, information, data, enablement, what are we doing there? Schedule milestones and look ahead alignment. That's critical, right? Because we always want to make sure that we are advancing the project and not just going through the motions of developing IWPs, right? A workflow perspective, resource optimization, I would say avoid the whipsaw, because do we really look at how our resources are being used, and we're not like building a crew up to 200 people one week and then there's only a demand for 50, but we got 200 people working, right? So do we move people around, let them go? What do we do, right? So let's avoid that whipsaw. On the process side, the IWP development and execution readiness, what am I getting, and then what am I giving, right? If we can have those conversations with our fellow conspirators, I guess I should say, or collaborators, right? We can get these handoffs right. So what do I need and what do others need? These are questions that we should be asking, and not just stamping an IWP out. What is the reliability factors? How am I going to finish on time so I can pass this on to others, the work on to others, and they remove my IWP as a prerequisite, right? And then I can track their IWPs as a prerequisite to my work. And how complete are the deliverables that ensures the probability of success, right? So if we do the same thing here at the EWP level, right, and engineering deliverables or procurement deliverables, we can see how all this turns into an optimal situation where we have a machine that's extremely efficient. And of course, all this needs to come down with procedures, with roles and responsibilities, so everybody knows what they have to go do efficiently, right, and not be guessing all the time. So the last thing I really want to talk about here is how do we take this whole concept of IWP development and release and actual execution, was the ultimate value add to the project, is getting that work done, right? Is keep this flow concept in mind. So we've shared this diagram many times, right? Here's the kind of the machine. We're taking the end in mind, the systems and the startup processes, right? Breaking into construction work areas, construction work packages. Then we go through a cycle of engineering, right? And then, but what we have, we're trying to build these packages, turnover packages, system work packages, ultimately guiding us what we really want to do efficiently or effectively to hand over, right? But all these packages. So here, in this case, we are shielding the work from all the required optimization of engineering, design, logistics, materials that has to go on here. We don't want to pass bad work down. Another aspect, of this is we don't want to hand over IWPs in the wrong order, so we can't do efficient startup, right? So again, it's a critical part that we have here from IWP development, release, and actually execution that needs to honor both sides of these boundaries. Get good work coming in and give good work, for startup. When we look at the breakdown and the details, and these are we develop these relationships, right? Same thing. There's a bunch of stuff. If we come into construction work packages, a lot of engineering information, a lot of procurement information, prerequisite CWPs, right? So when we release this, we want to know that, hey, the prerequisite work, the engineering work, and the procurement work are all there. So again, shield, right? When this is really ready to go, that's when we want to release our CWPs down for further IWP development and release work. And if we look at this from another perspective, where everything is leading to a turnover plan, turnover package, right? Same thing, right? We're trying to shield all this work, right, from going downstream, because the sequence of this blends itself into an effective turnover. Again, now we're at the IWP level, and this is where we have to be very, very really protect our foremen, general foremen, from doing the work. Again, we see these shields everywhere, and it's the same concept. Make sure the prerequisite work is being tracked. Our look ahead should be giving us confidence that people are actually going to go do the work and not just see them slipping, and slipping, right? Otherwise, I'll I can't get my work started efficiently, or I start fragmenting it, which is the worst thing we can do. All right. And then again, we're trying to get a lot of engineering information. We're trying to develop it. We're trying to remove constraints, whether the material constraints, engineering constraints, their equipment constraints, whatever those are. Our whole concept of IWP development, and readiness is really looking at those factors. And let's see, I think I have one more. Again, the same one. Trying to protect our turnovers, or at least letting the sequence of work of these IWPs help accelerate our turnover to this and the systems, basically the turnover packages, so we can have an efficient startup. So again, it's never letting bad work make it into the IWPs, or the IWPs not being completed or addressed make it to turnover packages, where all of a sudden we got massive punch lists. So we didn't follow these good guidelines. So ultimately here, again, I mentioned about flow, and we've been working on this for quite a while. And I'm not going to go through all the details of this, but it's essentially the influence curve, right? The earlier we start addressing anything that's going to affect the IWP development or release, early on, and what John said about fundamental scope blocks, is best to be done up here. What are those virtual IWPs and the scopes and sequences look like? How can we really start interrogating them much deeper than we do now, right? So again, it's the whole concept of goals by designing and engineering turns into detailed engineering and fabrication, assembly, final, and then final delivery and installation. So these are a little bit buffers of work, and this is a little bit the operation science perspective. But how much do I need to actually be successful as I go down this path of advanced work packaging practices, right? The other concept. Go ahead. Do you want to add something there, John?
And it's clearly, it's not doing it all at once. It's doing it when it needs to be done in a way so the work flows. And so I love the way you've highlighted out the intentional design of the buffers between the steps. Yeah. I think your next slide shows something. I saw this. This looks like a tax plan to me. Very, very the same ideas.
Yeah. So exactly. So if we can look at our IWPs down here and the execution and their relationships, we know everything behind this installation work package, if it's going to be successful, right, has all this work done behind it. So the success of this really depends on the success of everything in front of it, right? So the fact is, yes, we have to get our information flows right. We need to get our design and engineering flows correct and aligned. And what do our supply and logistics flows look like to support the installation? Because I want to get this when I need it, on time, and then I can drive significant efficiencies out in the field, right? Because that's where the value is, and that's where the huge expense is. So if I can really make this flow out here, and again, we're talking about integrated project delivery, as much as we can. That's the thing to be the wave of the future with technology, right? That's what's going to contribute to this. So with that mindset, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, the thing is, one of the little insights I got, quite a long time ago that's really shaping my thinking is we used to talk about man loading the schedule, and what you really do, you need to schedule the man load. And so all of your trade contractors, all of your crews need to have an efficient flow through the job site. And the process Fernando's showing there is all about enabling that so that they can get the job done for you and still make some money and still enjoy being on your project.
Yeah, right. So each one of these factors is basically a consideration in the development process of the IWPs. And we're really trying to get that series to complete, so when does a CWP complete? And then how much of this is integrated across multiple CWPs to actually get something done? Right. So we'll spend a few minutes here. And John, I'd love for you to talk about this critical flow concept.
Yeah, it's all about flow. And you'll see my little line there, flow's money, and so the things we would talk about, these are some of the things, why would you go do that? The flow helps you, there's a whole bunch of great attributes of the flow system. It's faster, it's better, it's cheaper. The and so you get better throughput, you're faster, better cash flow, a lot less frustration. So this is all about visualizing how the work happens. And probably like I say, the biggest problem we see often on projects is we can't even get started because we can't validate the cost and get the project going. It's off to the wrong step. And the other thing that you'll find, if you start thinking about flow in these terms, you're going to find out you can simultaneously make the project go faster and give the owner more time to make critical process decisions. The trade-off can be greatly mitigated by understanding how flow works. So if you jump onto the next slide, Fernando, this is a paper that we're getting ready to release here shortly through the joint working group, but we're going to talk about how we think project teams could think about flow in different ways. That's, how do we think about it? What do we think about work in process? How much do we want to have going on at one time? How much what should the batch size be? And how, so that's why, how many CWPs should we be working on at a time? How many IWPs should we be working on at a time? And buffers and decision timing and the whole thing about supply chain management. So I think this is a big field, but everything we talked about is here to go make projects flow a lot smoother.
So one of the key things, and again, this we started out with IWP development and release, and these fundamental concepts of flow are meant to contribute to that development and release process, because that is the key to basically delivering our projects timely and in the right order, and allowing all the team players, all the different organizations and people that are involved, right, to become much more efficient, right, and have a lot less issues, right, and drive these collaborative type environments and engagements that lead to more effective development of IWPs, and understand how their bit contributes to the overall success of a project and to their fellow partners, which is their own, out in the field, it would be their fellow contractors, subcontractors, vendors, and how they contribute to their success, as well, and be able to communicate information, much more earlier, so people can start getting aligned. They can start prioritizing their work much more effectively. So it's
and you can avoid a tremendous amount of rework. We had a great case study back in the Burns and Mac days where they had tried a job, but we've done a job a very traditional way, and it was very frustrating. We produced a great number of very sophisticated, good design, very thorough, professionally done design documents, got the numbers back, and they were way higher. We tried it the way that I was talking about here, as a revised thing. We were able to give the owner much better information in much less time and much less cost. Yeah. And so it was just a better experience of how we move through the system and answer that big question: can I get what I want for the money I got?
Yeah. And so, what we're trying to share here is, yes, there's a lot of great examples of IWP development and release planning that's going on with multiple companies, right now. And yes, can it be done better just from an AWP perspective? Absolutely. Right, but how do we take it to the next generation, next gen project delivery concept, right? How do we really drive it further with pressure on technologies just to do more, with collaborative environments needing to be set up, the demand on our project getting more and more demanding in terms of time, in terms of scope, in terms of cost of things, right? So this is meant to drive efficiency, really at the end, at the ultimate goal, to create this flow. So IWP development and release is a key component of really releasing good work to the foreman, right, in the right order, at the right time, and being sound in the size and everything is the ultimate goal. So there's more to say about the process of that, and if you need to understand that, we can address that later on. But the concept here is that we hope that you found this to be of value, is the idea that there is a lot. If we can open up our eyes and see the opportunity to bring things in earlier, to talk about integration potential, how things might affect better design, and engineering outcomes, right? How do I work best with my engineering team? How do I work best with my procurement team around these ideas of IWP development, fundamental scope blocks, and what have you? So it's all important, and we hope we've shared a lot with you and opened up a little bit, for food for thought kind of stuff, and how it would apply in different factors, whether you're on the AWP side or the Lean side. So, John, I don't know if you have any closing comments, but I think we're ready for take questions.
Also, we're trying to make it more visual and making it easier to visualize the scope and for everyone to visualize the same scope. The biggest, I'm sure a lot of you had experience. Everyone thinks they understand the scope until they all get together, and then we find out that we don't have a common understanding of the scope. And that's what we're trying to do, is make it well understood and visual up front. So with that, I can kind of see. I don't think I see all the questions. I saw a question about.
I can read them off to you. So one question obviously is, will the presentation slides be shared with attendees? The answer is yes, and I believe this session has been recorded, so both will be available to those that are that have attended, and we know that is actually something that people from around the world have also signed up for this, just so they know they would get the video and the recording and the slides. So yes, the answer to that. So we have a question about that AHU. John, you've sparked a few things. I'm thinking about how this would apply to one of my past projects. We ended up with 35, AHUs, and so as we talked about how getting involved early, and of course engineering and design changes over time. So it's I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about that progress or that flow.
Yeah, I think it had something about that they didn't understand that they had 35 right on. So one of the huge attributes or advantages of FSBs is they tend to come into and out of projects as a chunk. So if we will, it's very common during the scoping process early on for us to either have to add, modify, or delete an FSB. But on the air handler, the example I gave you, if you had to add one, you could copy one and have the scope activities already there with it. And if you have something, this is a huge advantage for your scope control process, because when something comes in, something's going to change, we can see everything that was connected to it. And so because the scope activities connect the FSBs together. And so that's also a big advantage of using, one of the databases. I showed you a few screenshots of one developed in QuickBase. So that is what helps you greatly enhance your ability to manage and control your scope, is that FSBs come into and out of a project as a unit, and you can see who all is affected pretty quickly. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, I also want to add to that, John. I think there is the functional part of creating an FSB, right? But it's when we look at what are we trying to do, we're actually trying to build up a team and have people communicate more effectively. So if we go through one, in this case, an AHU, and have this experience and things change, my team is already starting to gel, and it's already starting to know how to ask questions, or how something that we've already done can be quickly applied to a different condition. Mm-hmm. So the fact that we're really trying to look at the people side of the equation to drive better solutions, is part of the objective here as well.
And you can build learning in. You're not going to, if you got all the work to flush out this FSB, you go to the next project and say, hey, I've already scoped out an FSB. I've got a good idea. And you can even capture all the learning about that FSB. You can attach videos about how to install one, or what the tricky point connections are there. So this opens up an enormous amount of opportunity. And by the way, I've also had a project controls background, that if you had the information I'm talking about, when you visualize the FSBs and the scope activities, and you make that the basis of design, you've got kind of a dream world for a project controls person who never gets that or has to go extract that information later on. So it makes it much easier to do your basic project functions.
Yeah. And again, we're not getting too detailed at this early stage. Right, we're trying to look at the fundamental relationships and the fundamental scopes of an IWP, and a sequence of IWPs, not necessarily all the content and everything else, because most people know how to build, and they'll know what to integrate. The details need to be pushed downstream into when people that are actually going to go build can make better decisions, but hopefully aligned. So go to another question. We got a comment here. Fully agree with EWPs, CWPs, and IWPs. Unfortunately, today's projects are essentially driven by unrealistic schedules. Engineering is typically just in time with limited vendor data until we ensure everyone understands how long it takes to actually get reliable vendor information. The CWPs will always be half-baked, right? Without vendor information, absolutely CWPs will be half-baked. Now, the question about everything before that is some of the lean things that have been happening over the past several couple decades at least, right? Because there are other issues. Yes, the pressure is going to be on to do more work, but how do we align our teams to actually deliver what we need? Because sometimes we don't prioritize what we're really looking for. You know, when do we really need something? And if we're always working on everything all the time and asking too many questions, you know, it's too much for a project team to do. And what we've learned over our lean teachings is that if we can, and actually AWP is designed around this, by the way. So it's not, when I say lean, I also believe AWP has a lot of lean concepts in it, right? But as we break things down into CWPs, right, and EWPs and PWPs, are we spending as much time prioritizing them so we know what information we need, right? And you know, at what time, and how do we get our vendors, and how do we communicate this, right, across to make sure that we get as much information as we can. We're absolutely not going to be perfect, but then again, if we may not have everything we need from the vendors, but there's a what I call a collective decision-making process when we start releasing CWPs, that we want to make a collective go, no-go decision, and everybody understand the consequences of releasing things. That's a whole nother conversation.
Now, why do we think that this is not just applicable? Shielding is not just for the trade contractors. We also need to shield our design teams from the unrealistic expectations the question asked about. So we would do the same thing. You've got to make the work ready so the design team has a chance to go do it. And the process I described helps that a great deal. It really highlights, because we also track all the risks and the uncertainties that are connected with each FSP. It's quite an integrated process, but it's there to shield the design team, and also using the production control systems to have them designing the right thing at the right time.
Yeah. So another thing I'll add to that is in the AWP program and process, of course, we've heard a lot about the path of construction, and the development of that path of construction is the opportunity for, and there's not just one, there are multiple path of construction events, is the opportunity for the team to share these challenges and struggles and make better decisions on what they go do about it, right? Or help people make priorities, or help make people make decisions. So when we go to them, you know, as engineers or procurement folks or construction folks, we need to come prepared. We just can't be sitting in a meeting or a session thinking that there's a facilitator who's going to talk about things, but we don't know the consequences of putting something on a sticky note saying, I promise to do this, get this EWP done by this time, or this, you know, this massive piece of or vessel going to be delivered on this date, right? We have to actually bring the background and to make better, communicate better about really what's going on. So path of construction events are meant to be highly collaborative and interactive sessions to share knowledge with everybody, not just to come out of it and say, this is what we decided. All right, so we got another question here. Workface planning and the last planner system aren't too similar that it becomes redundant. That's a question. And one more question, how do we enter with milestone phases and planning pulled together with the workplace planning? Maybe that's with the workplace planner. So I'll take a first stab at it, John.
Sure.
That's good. So there are workplace planning, and what John and I and others in our joint working group have discovered is, yes, that absolutely makes sense to do you know, workplace planning, but the last planner work, what we do with the look aheads and things like that, is really not there. And we can add that element, or at least a more robust application of that element into the look ahead process once we release those IWPs. The other area, and John just mentioned this, is we can apply Last Planner into the engineering world, right? How do we really get things done, and how do we make decisions on what's a priority or not a priority, and then track that work, right? It's hugely effective in the engineering worlds outside of industrial projects, but in the healthcare and others, use it quite effectively, and I think we can apply that quite a bit. So yes, on the milestone sides, how do we enter with milestone phases and all that is part of the path of construction exercises by looking at the big chunks of work at the CWP level, right? And then driving that, maintaining those absolute dates of starting, even though they'll probably shift a little bit, but those should be our cues to aligning our IWP development, scoping and sequencing activities to fall within those milestone dates. So there's quite opportunity there for sure. Go ahead, John.
I think the short little thing about that, about the connection between Workface Planning and Last Planner system, they're extremely complementary. I think if you do it right, I think they were intended to be complementary. So we're identifying the scope activities way up front, so that when we come into the Last Planner system, that is where we're down to the actual performers, and that is allowing the Last Planner system is allowing the field crews to schedule how they want to go do the work. Starting from several weeks ahead. Workface Planning is in all the logistics that have to happen to actually make that. So yeah, I'll make a reliable promise to go install the chilled water line next week, but someone's got to make sure I've got the right O-rings. Someone's got to make sure I have everything that I need. And I think that is the discipline of advanced work packaging. That's how it started. It started as an extremely robust make-ready need. And a big movement in the lean construction movement is, hey, we need to do a lot better job of constraint removal. Well, that's what Workface Planning does. So let's let Workface Planning do what it does well, and let the lean Last Planner system, or the TAC planning or other production control systems, whatever production control system you're using to manage flow, you're using it to let it work. And by the way, milestones, by the way, I tend to associate all the schedule activities or scope activities early on with a milestone. So when I go look at that milestone, I'm electronically seeing all the scope activities I had associated with it. And it helps build the master schedule if you want to.
Yeah. All right.
So we got a few minutes. Do you see a winning question there, Fernando?
Yeah, there's quite a few. Probably not be able to get to all of them, but we can hang out for a little bit more. One of the challenges to train the supervisor or site team to use BIM and more software instead of using hard copies of drawings for construction. Is this true? I would say yes. If you're trying to use a production tool, a high-level engineering tool, yes, it's difficult to get all the supervisor and site teams to use that. But there are absolutely work packaging software and other softwares that help visualize that are much more user-friendly. I myself involved with WorkPaks, so I do have these tools, and there's a lot of them out there where yes, I want to access what I need when I need it. I want to see visuals and not have to go and be an engineering jockey to do all that. So yes, there are tools out there, and you should learn them and look at what's available, because that's the means for communicating engineering information, logistics, material information directly down to the people that are trying to plan and execute the work. So that's one. Let me let's see. Wow, we've got a lot of questions.
You know what?
Another one.
Quick thing here, just as a quick wrap up for everybody goes for now. How about I suggest this? We've had a lot of questions. Maybe we can ask the audience to go through and put away your biggest takeaway. So rather where a question has a question mark after it, if you have a final, something you heard today that was surprised you, or something new, or you're gonna go tell someone about, take a second to put that in the chat, and either write takeaway or just put an exclamation mark for, so we can kind of see that. That would help us to see if we got across the message that we were trying to.
Yeah, so if you could do that, that'd be great. I'll go through one more question here. Who are the best people on the project team to build these work packages? What tools are available to facilitate these packages? So if we look at an installation work package, right? The best person is the Workface Planner that actually builds it, but he's a facilitator of the development of them, right? So we talk about development. That Workface Planner dedicated role is assigned to doing just that. But his role also says, I will integrate, I will facilitate, I will work with engineering, I'll work with procurement, I'll work with my foreman and general foreman, the superintendent, right? Whatever vendors I need to make sure that when I release this, I have all the information I need. The materials are out there, right? So there's a whole installation work package content process that is critical to this. But that would take another webinar. Maybe that's going to be a topic for another one. But the fact is, yes. Or in the lean world, the last planner is typically a foreman or someone very, very close to the foreman that's going to develop that. But in the AWP world, it's a Workface Planner. In the CWP side of the equation, there are CWP coordinators or AWP coordinators. That's their responsibility to help organize the engineering teams at the CWP level, the procurement teams, the site teams, the vendors, the project controls, to actually develop that as well and release the CWP downstream to the field.
And a really big deal that if you do this well, you let your foremen and supervisors primarily be supervisors. You don't, I think we have to be very respectful of taking all their time and dragging them in. What I found, they don't want to sit in a planning meeting and talk about constraint analysis. They want to talk about how their workflow. So we want to honor their time. Then if we had the Workface planners are taking care of logistics that takes to support the last planner, then you're respecting their time, letting them spend their time in the field, and letting them do the things that they want to go do, which is making their crews flow well. Everyone loves to be on a smooth flowing job. So let's help them do that.
All right. So we are at the top of the hour, and I think John, should we anything else we want to add before we thank everybody?
Yeah. Thanks so much for your attention. I hope you found it interesting, and hope you came across with something you hadn't seen before.
Yeah, thanks. And I know there's a few questions coming up, so really appreciate it. We'll try to get that out, and again, the recording and the slides will be made available. I believe it's about a couple weeks before it starts making its way through emails. All right. So anyway. Thank you so much. Hope it was of value to you, and look for more AWP plus Lean webinars. We do this every month, basically. So our next topics should be just as interesting as this one, hopefully. And we'll keep in touch. So expect to see an email from CII that announces the next one.
You bet.
All right.
Hey guys, thanks, Fernando.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your time, and have a great day.